Hello and welcome to Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a million-part series. My name is Logan Wolf, and I'm coming to you from my office in Provo, Utah. My wife and I moved here 12 years ago as church planters, and during that time, man, our ministry has taken a number of different expressions, turns and twists that we did not expect. We started as that mobile church meeting in the conference center of a hotel. After 5 years, we were a multi-site, like overnight, with buildings and staff in 2 different counties. And then after several years of that, we even offloaded that structure and have been functioning for nearly 5 years now as a network of house churches across the state of Utah and beyond. My purpose in this podcast is looking back over that experience, that decade plus ministry experience, church planting experience, and just deconstructing it and sifting back through it. So to just basically help you in making some decisions. If you are a church planter preparing to plant or who have just recently planted, I want to save you some of the heartache and the frustration and the tears, as well as just the time and energy and money that we have just wasted and burned through and so many different points in our own ministry. And today I am joined by a friend of mine, Chris Murray, who lives in Santaquin, Utah. And we know we've had several different voices, several different church planters on the podcast already. And Chris is someone here in Utah with me. In fact, he's someone I still rub shoulders with and run with some consistency. So his story does not parallel mine in the strictest sense, like maybe Isaac's did. Isaac's been on a few episodes out there in California. But again, I think it's something tremendous value to hear how he started, what he went through, where he's landed. And we're going to kind of let him share that story now and basically highlight maybe one of the bigger mistakes that he feels like he's made. And if it turns into, we need to have this over a series of episodes, we absolutely would do that. But Chris, man, I appreciate you joining me tonight.
Yeah, Logan, thanks for having me on, man.
Right on, bro. Well, it is good to see you. I would, just for the sake of our listeners, the audience, would you just recap your own story? I mean, your own background, even becoming a believer, because I know that's unique to you as a church planter in Utah, and then walk through as much as you think we need to that story of your church planting experience, where you've landed now, and then we'll kind of unpack your mistakes that you have made. And if I know, bro, I know we've talked like you or like me, your mistakes I know have been multitudinous, like just plentiful. So we're gonna try to pick those apart and distill them for the sake and the benefit of our audience. But go ahead, bro, share with us what your story, your church planting experience has been.
Yeah. So kind of to start, I am a native Utahn. I grew up LDS, which is the common belief system around here. And I probably about age, I'd say 13, started to really get serious about life and death and about the kind of person I was going to turn out to be. In that, I decided to take a LDS seminary class. And in that LDS seminary class, I got bored rather quickly and I started reading my Bible, and I encountered Jesus in the midst of his word.
Amen.
While in a completely different religion's instructive class. So it was kind of interesting. I spent about 2 years running away from God, running away from grace, and then God kind of cornered me and said, "It's time." And when I was a senior in high school, and I had an uncle who had gotten saved, kind of somewhat miraculously. He came back, preached the gospel, and asked me if I believed, and I knew I did. It was evident that the gospel was real, and my life was transformed over the next couple of years. Through a couple of ups and downs and things. It's like a stock; it rises and falls as you go. But God definitely got a hold of my life and began to change my priorities, begin to heal some things in me. Always having that feeling of not belonging. All of a sudden, I was completely accepted in the arms of Christ, and that was just a beautiful thing. So fast forward a little bit, I ended up because I'm as you know, Logan, I'm a little bit of a hyper guy. I've always got a sarcastic joke to tell. So
No.
I could spit a hot rhyme or two. So somebody thought that sounds like a great guy to throw into youth ministry. And so I spent about 11 to 12 years, being a youth pastor or youth director, kind of depending on where I was at. I also was able to run a church camp and a couple of statewide retreats and things like that along the way. And in the midst of all that, God just really got a hold of my heart about discipleship. I kept seeing these teens come through youth group, and when they graduated youth group, it was like they graduated church.
Yeah.
And I say all that because it's a bigger part of our planting story. Um, as they kind of graduated church, I started to realize like I hadn't been discipling them; I had just been entertaining them for years,
Yeah.
and I'd never actually brought them into an encounter with the real Jesus. And so when they left, and when there was no more youth group to be a part of, their faith kind of left with the youth group. And so I also, my family and I, we walked through a couple of pastoral changes at the church we were at. So I got to step into some interim pastor duties, and God just began to impress upon me more and more this need for deep relationship, both with the believer and Christ, and then the believers with other believers, that we were actually meant to live more in tribes than we were
Right.
meant to live as a part of like organizations.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really what, and I don't say that to like diss the organizational church or diss what some people I think have properly identified as like free market churches, where it's kind of
Right.
like everybody starts their own little like
Yeah.
entrepreneurial church, and
Yeah.
in some ways, as much as my heart was moving in that direction, I didn't fully grasp how much of my heart was still rooted in that organizational free market system,
Yep. Yep.
where a lot of it, so kind of I'll keep on my story and maybe come back around to that. I think that might make more sense. So we stepped out of our youth ministry in December of 2020.
How long had you
Um,
been a youth pastor at that point? How
that was 12 years of
you were
being a youth pastor,
12 years. Okay.
and 4 to 5 of those as being an interim pastor at the church that I served. So I was kind of
Doing both.
carrying the
Okay.
dual hat. There's
Okay.
there's a really good teacher that I like. I don't agree with this, but he has a funny quote. He says every time you have a church with a youth pastor there more than 5 years, he's just a senior pastor that couldn't make it. So I try not to take that to heart, but that's not true. If you're listening, by the way, it's not true, but it's just kind of a funny dig at myself. Um,
Oh,
so after that 12 years, and I read through a couple of different books on just small micro church and high volume church multiplication. Cal, I'm trying to remember. I know we talked a little bit about titles, and they're all escaping my mind right now. So that's of no
well,
help to your audience.
you were you in the book discussion that we did around mega church and multiplication?
No,
You were not in that. Okay, never mind then. That was one I thought
that's a good one though.
that is a good one, but you weren't part of that. Okay, no worries, no worries.
Yeah.
Good, go on.
No, honestly, we went through a lot of the We Are Church video series. My wife and I spent
Yeah.
a long time, and then just reading through Acts with this like new vision of what the church was like we didn't impress our 21st century Western culture church into the story. We actually just let the story be the story, and
Yeah.
it really impressed upon us this need for change. So we left our youth ministry, went into we got connected with a mission organization that had a like mind for seeing highly multipliable disciple making focused churches that lived in tight community with one another. We got involved with them. Left our church, went and did a church planting residency. Excuse me, and we did that for about 6 months. Along those 6 months, we picked up a couple of folks. We actually picked up another couple that was dedicated to this adventure, I'd say, of doing church. And we began to take them through some of the trainings that we had, and got ready for a launch. And I had the whole time. I mean, I had really thought that we were probably not going to launch for a year or two, and then we ended up jumping out 6 months after we started the residency. And that's probably a podcast for another day.
Well, let me stop you here. So
Yeah.
we did an episode about launching too quickly. I don't know if you listened to that one yet. I know you've listened to some where we're basically, we moved in May and we're doing like preview services in June, July, and August, and launching in September. So do you feel then? It sounds like, do you feel hindsight, you didn't give yourself enough time between gathering those people and launching? Or talk through that just a sec. I mean, just briefly if you can.
Yeah. I think two of the mistakes I made there were I was in a rush for no reason. It felt like it felt like having that service where the church prays over you and sends you out was like what made it real.
Yeah.
But it was already so real. Like as I look back on it now, like we were gathering people in our home, we were making disciples, they were eating meals with us. That was one of the mistakes I made. And then the second one was I didn't demand, and this is going to sound a little harsh, but I didn't demand buy-in from the people who were telling me it was time to launch. So folks weren't being a part of our, we had these processes we had kind of agreed to as a body, and how we were going to step out and launch. And there were people who came in who just didn't agree with those processes. That wasn't something they were interested in. They were only interested in getting the church kind of separated from this other thing, in order to launch it out. And like in my mind, I can remember specifically like saying like, hey, I don't think it's time, but if they're ready, I don't want to hold it back. And now I like go back and I'm like, oh man, like I wish I could talk to that Chris. Like,
well,
which is the point of all this, but
yeah. Well, that reminds me, a couple episodes ago, we had a church planter from Mississippi on, James Reardon, and he talked about, he used the metaphor of pirates and Christians that you bring along thinking they're going to help you, but pirates in the sense that they commandeer, nautical term, commandeer things and kind of redirect things. And it sounds like that's what other people were getting a chance to speak into it that probably shouldn't have had a chance to speak into it, right? I mean,
well, and the result of that was, I believe, a month after we planted, these people we had 5 families when we planted, which was pretty good for a starting out house church. Man, that's pretty healthy in numbers. These people that were really pushing for the launch, within a month had taken 3 of the families that started having their own like rival meeting in the same like neighborhood. And so and then there were, a couple of wonky things like we don't want to study the Bible, we don't believe in church leadership, like and things I was willing to kind of wade through because I thought the word would kind of do the work of convincing them. But I think I could have probably have waited on letting the word kind of convince them before I decided to make like a giant investment in them and risk this other couple that was with us that were just super faithful and super invested in the vision. There was a lot of confusion that kind of created in them. So, it's really just poor leadership on my part. I mean, that's really what it comes back to.
Bro, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I look back and see, you could point, it is breakdowns and things you should have said you didn't say, and things you did say you shouldn't have said, and should have been patient when you weren't, and vice versa. So I know, I totally get it. Okay, so that was a rabbit trail. We cut off your basically your narrative, your story. You said you rushed for no reason, you were starting too quickly, things kind of got wonky. Okay, pick up from there, bro, just church planning wise.
Yep. Yeah. So for about 6 months it was just us and this other couple meeting, and honestly it was a beautiful time of fellowship, but we didn't have any mechanism at this time for like interacting with people outside of our little circle. And that's like, house churches are beautiful, but I mean, as you know, that's like you have to have a mechanism where you're engaging with the culture outside of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and it wasn't like a us 4 close the door, no more type of thing, but almost like functionally, that's kind of what it was. It was kind of a closed off group. It was really hard to break into. So about 6 months went by. The Lord brought in a couple of folks who started kind of coming along. And one of the big things we pushed as we planted this church is we didn't want to be all about Sundays. Like we wanted to engage throughout the week, and for Sunday to be a culmination of what God was doing throughout the week.
Yeah.
So we had a couple other people come along, and their only investment was they were willing to come on Sunday. I mean, and in fact, one of them was attending a different church with her husband, and then coming and kind of hanging out, and kept calling the church a Bible study. And which, I mean, and again, like I think that's just what you're seeing is a couple of like gauges there to kind of show you where people are at. And I kept just being like, well, they'll get it.
Well,
So
let me stop you
yeah,
because I want
yeah,
to, just as even a reminder to maybe pick this up down the road. When we switched our service time, when we were in the buildings, we switched our
yeah,
service times from the morning to the evening, and thinking it was contextualizing it, accommodating for Mormons who would go to their ward in the morning and then come to us in the evening. But you had that same issue, that exact scenario where you have believers show up and they were viewing it as, oh, I go to this and this church in the morning, and this is something I do in addition. And that's fine. I don't want to,
yeah,
like, there is this bigger picture, and that's great, but you can't build, and I think that's what you're getting at, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't build on this lack of commitment, kind of like, oh, when it's convenient, I'll show up kind of thing. Like, this is just extra. That's like, that's
yeah.
not how you can't start a new church, a church plant, if everyone's viewing it as something, convenient. I'll just show up whenever I want, right?
No, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's shown through. And I think you have to identify two things. I think early on, you have to identify what is church to these people. Like, what is their definition of church? Like,
Yeah.
everybody should
Yeah.
have to write that down. I think actually every church should be required to just have on the front of their building,
This
like,
is what we're,
here's,
yeah.
yeah, this is. I know we attempt to do that with our websites, but I think we get a little complicated. I think it'd be better to just be like, church definition. Like,
Every
here's what we
Sunday
do.
we're putting it up front. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And then also, the second thing is, and what is your purpose in that church?
that's good.
Do you know? And so what
Yeah.
I had was, and to bless these people's heart, they were very clear about who they were. I just wasn't listening. One of them said, hey, I'd like to start something similar in my own home. And I really feel like God has called me to this. And I just kind of want to come experience it so that one day I can reproduce it. And I know, like, as a disciple, maybe we get really excited about that, but um, the reproduction was kind of already happening in my home, and there was kind of a domination a little bit of the meetings. That, it's nobody's fault. It's just a natural outpouring of who people are, and you have to believe them for who they are. If they believe they're a teacher, and you're going to invite them into, like, an exploratory Bible study, then you're going to have to be very clear about your boundaries, to have them not, like, kind of take over. Right? It's like
Right.
when I came to your house church and I talked too much.
No,
I
did you?
just messing
No.
around. I just messing around. I think I did, though. I think maybe like a couple of times I might have, like, talked a little too much, but
Oh,
uh,
that's funny.
but
That's
uh,
funny.
but yeah, no. And so we started to see this couple that was with us, that was sold on the mission, that understood what the church was supposed to be. They just started to see that we weren't actually doing these exploratory Bible studies where people were engaging Christ for themselves. We were having conversations where everybody was just saying their opinion. Um,
Yeah.
and that was a lot on me, that I I was very good at stopping people and say, where do you see that in the word? But I wasn't very good at having the conversation after the gathering to say, hey, like, I'm not sure you're really, like, invested here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there probably should have been, on my part, a little bit more effort to, like, outside of the Sunday gathering, to kind of pull these people aside and say, hey, like I just kind of want to know where your level of investment is, and how can I, if this isn't really kind of what you're aiming towards, how could I steer you towards something that you would maybe be a little more comfortable in?
Well, and bro, but okay. I mean, we're 12 plus years going on 13 years in, and that's still a struggle for me. Like, it is hard to do that. And I get it. I get that it is a mistake. Like, I know, like, that's something that needs done.
Yeah.
But yeah, in hindsight, you look back and, like, man, I should have said this. I should have said this. But I also can empathize with you. I know how hard it is to pull someone aside and, like, have a very pointed, direct conversation. So yeah.
Well, and I think that buy-in to what the church was had to come first, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like, how much, I mean, I don't think any of these people showed up with a desire to tear down, or any of that. I think they showed up with an understanding of what they wanted, and maybe not an understanding of what the church was.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so we went on, and this other couple that was super faithful and understood the vision, we started to see them kind of disengage a little bit, because the meetings, it was just kind of getting boiled down to just Sundays. a lot of like everybody, like nobody actually like interacting with the word and finding discovery for themselves, but a lot of like, well, you should do this and you should, like, there were things about it that were very beautiful. Like, I don't want to like completely sell it off like, oh, it was just terrible the whole time. Like, I really genuinely enjoyed like my time with these people, but um we started to see this like slow deconstruction of like what the dream was and what the hope was for this. And
Yeah.
then my wife kind of just asked me one day, and my wife doesn't, as you know, Megan, she doesn't talk much, but when she does, you better listen because she
That's
usually is.
right. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And so she just asked me, she goes, "Are we doing anything of what we set out to do?" And and like and she kind of shared some of her frustration that things had like floated so far away from what we had set out to do. And a
Yeah.
lot of it comes back to this idea that I knew what the end product was going to look like, but I was not good at identifying the processes that I had to walk through and I had to get good at in order to produce this end product that I hope for. And I think even the end product, I had like been so specific with it. I did not allow for for the opportunity that God might not give me every single thing that I needed in
Hmm.
order to accomplish that. And so in some ways I was in love with the product and not in love with the process.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, man.
Or the
That's
result, if you don't like the word product when I talk about church. Like, I was in love
that,
with the result. I wasn't in love with the process of getting to the result.
right. It's living in the future and not living necessarily in the present where you're at, like what God's doing right now in the moment. So, I mean, that, and it sounds like this is what it builds towards. And I think this is what we talked about kind of settling on as this big mistake that was made, is this
Yeah.
living for the future and like the product, the result, and
Hmm.
not living in the present, the process of, I think you said it this way when we were talking earlier. I loved my love for the result or product was greater than the love of the process, which product or not, the alliteration P and P is where it's at, man. Right. So it's
Oh yeah. 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 Absolutely. Well, and in some ways, our team, the other couple that was with us, again, this was their first step into ministry. Like, they had kind of just been like, they had served as churchgoers, but they had never like stepped out and like had a ministry be theirs. And the other guy I was serving with, he was really good at bringing everything down to earth and kind of bringing things back to ground zero, as I like
yeah.
vision casted off into space. Like, he was good. And as he kind of started to feel a little bit of disengagement on his end, then we kind of lost that element of our partnership. And so, and again, I think this all just kind of boils back to, I loved churches. I didn't love the process of church planting. Or the,
Yeah.
like I love the idea of a biblically intimate, like close to Jesus, close to each other, serving the community church,
Right.
but I didn't love what it was going to take to get there. And so, to kind of, before we jump into that, maybe I should just end it off. So we ultimately moved towards a place where we looked at the health of everyone involved, and we just said, we asked ourselves the question: would you want to disciple somebody to this church? And the answer was no, um, because it
Yeah.
just wasn't healthy. And my wife was kind of in a place where she felt like she needed to kind of step back and recover a little bit. There's some relational hurts and some things that she had walked through and all of that. I was starting to become a little bit frantic in my leadership, becoming more reactive than responsive.
Yeah.
Um, and we just kind of made the decision that it was time to kind of pull back and rediscover the mission. Um, and
Yeah.
kind of see, like, did we really want what we were going after? Um, and
Yeah.
and luckily, like, I mean, I'm not trying to get to the end of the story, but luckily, like, God has brought us to a place where we're like, yes, we still want that. We just
Right.
now have to talk about, how do we fall in love with the process?
And so, just again, for the sake of the audience, you have circled back. You're not actively planting a church right now. Like, could be
Uh,
like, right.
yeah, I mean, not
It's
not in
on
the
the
sense, yeah, not in the sense where you could say, here's our name, here's our website, and here's
right.
here's our logo.
Yeah.
I would say, in the sense of, my wife and I are dedicated to becoming better disciples so that we
Amen.
can become better disciple makers.
Yeah,
We're
man.
kind of taking this year to establish some mentorship around us, to grow closer to Jesus in ourselves, and then to just start to build some more healthy rhythms into our family, so that when
Yeah.
we invite people into these processes, it's just a natural outworking of who we are, as opposed to some like thing we've set up for you to come to. Do you
Right.
know what I'm saying?
A- Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So then let's maybe touch on that a little bit, because let me ask you this question first, because I don't think your experience is unique, because I feel like church planting is that, quote unquote, sexy thing to do or cool thing to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I've talked to a lot of church planters. I know you have. I mean, do you find that there's a lot of people that like, they want to get in the church planting, but they're thinking to the end and not actually considering what all that takes to get there? I mean, what have you
Yeah.
seen just pattern wise in that?
Well, it's we hear these great stories of men that men that went into these like distant lands, and they established a church network, and and then like people write books about them and make movies about them, and they're kind of the star of the show there. And that's, I think, men, most church planters are men. And I think men naturally want, and that's biblical.
There you go.
Men naturally want like a glory unto themselves. Like that's just how we are. We
Yep.
want to accomplish things. We want to say at the end of our life, I
I did
dedicated
this.
my life to its
Yeah.
purpose and I accomplished it.
Yep.
And there are, in the same way, like you lift weights, right? Like you're
Yep.
like nobody. I don't know if everybody knows this about you, that you're like this mega athlete now. Like
I don't know about all
like
that, but
Logan takes Ironman competition or strongman competitions like they're
oh my
Tic Tacs.
gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a lot of individual choices that lead up
Right.
to a bigger choice so that you can compete, right?
Right. Right.
And it's the same, it's the same thing with most things we do. We just don't we don't see church like that, because we bring in the spiritual element. We think everything's going to be really easy because it's spiritual, right?
Yeah, dude, I
Am I
know.
wrong about it?
No, bro. You're just upsetting me.
And so then when things are hard, or when we're not naturally good at things, we tend to just kind of lean into the things we're good at, and
Yeah.
like ignore the things we're not good at, even if they're absolutely vital and necessary to our mission.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think somewhere along the way I stopped thinking of myself as a quote unquote church planter, and I started thinking of myself as an overseer of a mission in my city.
Yeah.
And when you kind of that seems like the same thing, but it's actually, there's a mindset change, because all of a sudden your heart becomes dedicated to people knowing Jesus, and then knowing other people that know Jesus, more so than people coming to your church.
Mm, yeah.
And it's so, I mean, even now when I say that, like, I still love preaching. I love being on a Sunday morning, and there's like a lot of people, and they're like listening, and I'm like, giving them the word, and God,
Yeah, man.
and you can feel the Spirit just moving through you as you like declare this eternal truth over their lives. But that's not church planting. That's
No.
that's the result. And even in that, there's things you need to be able to do to even make that somewhat effective.
Yep.
And it's really weird, because God's now moving my heart. How much I love preaching. I feel like God's moving me towards a model where I don't even know that like anything more than like a 15-minute sermon is going to be the result of a Sunday. And
Right.
like, I mean,
Dude.
and yeah. And
Yeah.
so I'm in this place just where God is refining that in me, and trying to get me to fall in love with the processes of making disciples and meeting my neighbors, and just serving people with no agenda. And that's so hard, because if you want to plan a mission, the first place the mission starts is in your own heart, and in your own life, and in your own family.
Yeah, man. That's good,
And
bro.
sorry, I went on a
No,
tear
no,
there.
no. And I wonder, I don't know if it's enough to give a full conversation to it, but that's the same. I remember when we were coming out here, our missions director, and I talked about this in the episode where I talked about missions agencies. Our missions director, who had never been a missionary, never planned the church, asked us directly, like, do you intend to be the pastor of this church indefinitely? And in my mind, I was like yeah, like that. But there was like this confusion, like church planting, that apostolic, missional, evangelistic gifting juxtaposed to the pastoring, shepherding, teaching giftings. And I think sometimes, I don't know, there's this confusion around those two things, and it's like the front end, all that missional work, the evangelistic, prophetic, missional type work is way different than the shepherding, teaching, standing up front, like you said, to a full room and everyone's a good job, preacher, that was a great message. That's totally different. And I think we've done some of that too, where we looked to, it would be great. Of course, we had that. We didn't start with the house churches like you did. We started in the conference center of a hotel, and it was empty for a full year. So we had very humble, very quick around that image of preaching to the crowd. But hey, okay, circle back here.
Yeah.
And you talking about in this season, okay, we started church planting, some unhealthy patterns, some things, people coming in. Again, I want to use Tierden's metaphor of the pirates coming in with different opinions, pulling it in different ways. You've pulled back from it. You're not actively gathering people like you were in that setting. But you talked about establishing some healthy rhythms.
Yeah.
So will you just speak to, okay, if we're going to start making disciples and gathering disciples and starting churches and building the kingdom, what are you learning in this then? Like, what do some of those rhythms look like? Let's give some practical handles to some of this.
Yeah. So whatever your model is going to be, and I'm kind of trying to broaden this out, because I can get like, I always think my way is the best way. And so like, I don't, I'm a real tyrant.
Bro, if I thought it was wrong, I wouldn't do it, right? That's
Exactly. But what I'd say is, whatever your model is going to be, make it a natural outworking of your own life and your family. So if you're going to do the big to small, like big to small model, where you have the big Sunday and then that breaks out into these smaller groups throughout the week, then what I'd say is, like, learn how to, if you already got the big Sunday figured out, learn how to build those really healthy smaller groups, because you're going to have to teach somebody how to do that one day.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to love teaching someone to do it, even if they're not just like you and they don't do it just like you, because smaller means you've got to let go of a little bit of control.
That's right. Right.
And so, or if you're going to go, the other route of, like, we're going to do the Wednesday night, midweek Bible study, we're going to have a kids thing, we're going to have that. Like, I would just say, like, start doing that with your family, to where you could just start to build that out as you add people. Yeah, because it's so much easier to work out all the kinks with people who love you and can't leave, like, than it is to, like, you know what I mean? Like,
you live in this house, you will be.
Exactly. And I think that's when I knew my church plant wasn't doing well. When my kids I said, hey, you want to come down for church? And they were in their rooms and they said, nah. I was like, well, I appreciate that, but
oh my God,
we'll talk about that later, but you got to come down for church. I'm sorry. So,
wow.
So I would say definitely, and then whatever you're not good at, just look that in the face. Really just look it in the face and say, okay, I've got to do one or two things. I've either got to improve, or I've got to go and find.
Right.
And I know I had a lot of brothers like yourself. You came out, walked my neighborhood, prayed with me. I know you didn't do that, so I'd mention it on your podcast. But I
was say I didn't know, I did not, but I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I know. And you even, like, you were one of the few pastors that actually came and sat through a Sunday and kind of gave me an honest, like, outsider opinion of what you saw. And all those things are so healthy. But I still, in that time, I didn't fall in love with going door to door, or, with prayer walk in my neighborhood. I have started to kind of step back into now, like, a rhythm of just getting out into the community and, like, and getting in there and, like, sharing the gospel with folks, and just seeing where it goes, and, like, learning, like, what to stay out of, what to get, because I'm great at arguing. I'm not so good at just, like, knowing when to say, hey, this probably isn't going anywhere. God's probably not working in this person's heart. I could probably move on. But I would say, whatever you're going to do for your church plant, whatever your model is, just start living it now. Now, if you've got the big attractional model, and, I don't know if you should go set up at the park with your guitar and just start. Maybe that is, though, because in a lot of ways, that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be setting up somewhere and just hoping to attract people.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we're kind of starting to build that in our family. that, midweek kind of real deep fellowship. And then on Sundays, we see it as a serve and share day. So we want to go and serve other people. And then we want to try to share Jesus with like whoever we can encounter, whether that be at a church service. We've talked about maybe going and doing some other things like just going out and serving at a home, a food shelter, or, whatever we can get our hands on. But this idea of like, if Sundays are going to be about reaching out, then let's go reach out. Like, let's do it now. Let's not wait till we have some people. And then we're like, oh, I think we know what to do. Like, we've already lived it. Like we're kind of the way Megan and I put it is eating. We're eating our own medicine. You know what I mean? Like we're not just saying this would be great for you to do. We're saying, hey, we've been doing this.
We'll do it also.
Come into this with us. And if we don't like doing it, if we're refusing to do it, how dare we ask anyone else to?
Bro, and so when I had a conversation or an episode, it was just me, so it was not a conversation, but about making disciples and how I had never made disciples until moving here, and even then, not until just recently, right? But to your point of like, you don't wait till you start to do the things that like I think that's huge. Like you don't wait till you move to the city you feel like God's calling you to, and then I'll start sharing the gospel, and then I'll start making disciples and praying for people. Don't wait till your first Sunday before you. I completely agree with that. Like go ahead and have those healthy biblical rhythms of service and prayer and gospel sharing and hospitality and all of that. Why would you not just go ahead and incorporate that and let that be the overflow, the ministry be the overflow of your life? I think that's a great takeaway, man. That's solid. That's good.
Yeah. And I would say also pastor the church you have, not the church you want.
Well, and that goes to the very first thing you said, the big mistake, right? Living for the future and not living in the moment. And that's two different things, isn't it? Because the church you might want is years away, huge distance away from where you are personally. And I failed at that too, man. You have this always thinking bigger and more, and one day will, and one day never comes, right? Because then you hit that attendance goal, or you hit that offering goal, or you hit that big special service, or whatever it is, whatever metric you're using, and it doesn't satisfy you. Like, so that is also an identity piece in that. It's like, the ministry is not, there's more to it than just what I'm doing. Right.
Yeah.
And
and I think, recently I listened to discipleship.org had a podcast, and I'm going to shoot you the link so you have it for the show resources, because I don't remember the name of it. But they were they had a gentleman on who's talking about sustained disciple making. So it's disciple making that doesn't burn out in 6 months. You know what I mean? Like and he talked about thinking about it in terms of a 3-year commitment to make a disciple that'll ever reproduce something. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and kind of using the story of Jesus to talk about that's what it looked like for him. Yeah. I mean, he walked with those guys for a long time, and honestly was probably able to spend a lot more time with them than you or I probably have in our platter to spend with folks. And so having that long-term vision of just like loving the journey of seeing somebody discover Jesus and have him become bigger in their lives for a long period of time. And he even said there's usually a break between year 2 and year 3. So like usually they'll pull back for something. He said you just kind of have to expect it. He's like, but don't give up on it. Like, so I don't want to go too far, but I will shoot the link because I don't remember names. I'm terrible with names and titles.
No, that'd be great, man. We'll throw that in the show notes as well. So bro, anything else? We're gonna wind this down here. We've been going, we're at that 30-minute mark. Anything else related to this idea of you were living in the future instead of actually in the past? You loved the product, the result, instead of the process of church planting. Anything else you want to say, or resources you want to reference, or anything of that before we kind of wind it down?
Yeah. I guess first thing I'd say is if you kind of look in the mirror and you love church plants and the idea of taking the gospel to places where it's never been before, but you look in the mirror and you just say, hey, like, I don't think I'm really going to enjoy church planting. That's okay. Like, I just want to say, like, it doesn't make you less of a Christian because you come to that realization. But here's what I would say. If you do have the heart for church planting, yet you are yourself not a church planter, you can always be someone's support system. You can always be the
Yeah.
person where you say, hey, man, when you go out in the field, you can call me anytime. I'll talk to you about whatever's going on. I will care about your church plant like no one else will, and I will be here for you. If you
That's
need,
good.
and if you want to be a financial partner. I mean, I'm not trying to make it about money, but I tried to set my church plant up so we didn't need any because we're in Utah and there's not a lot to go around. And so, but if your model requires a certain level of finances, like or the person you're connected to's model requires a certain level of finances, be that person. Like set aside,
Yeah.
so much of your living to be able to support that, and you'll be surprised how much God will bless you when you can give to a ministry you believe in.
That's good.
And then in terms of books, I would just say there's a really good book. It's a little bit not very well known. I suggested it to you. It's by Christopher VanDusen, and it's what the New Testament has to say to Western Christianity.
Yeah,
Um,
it's good. I was looking back on my shelf, and I think I told you this. You can see if you're watching this video on YouTube and not on the audio. So my
yeah,
bookshelf is organized by color, which looks cool, but is not a convenient way. So I don't remember what color the book was. I was going to pull it and show it, but I don't remember what color it was.
that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. It's pretty easily findable on Amazon or whatever.
We'll
But
throw a link in the show notes as well.
yeah,
Yeah,
I would say just read that and really, look at what these men in the New Testament had to sacrifice to establish these churches.
that's good.
And count the cost, before you start going telling everybody that you're going to pay the bill.
That's good. Good.
Because it stinks when you get out there and the invoice comes and you ain't got the money. I'm using that in like a metaphorical sense, but
Oh, that's good, man. Well, Chris, I appreciate you joining us. We will have to, man, I'd love to have you on again and kind of flesh out even some of the topics we just touched on. But I know there's been plenty. You and I, again, Chris is in Utah with me. He's just down 40 minutes down the road, if that.
yeah.
So we get to talk a lot, and I know there's tons of lessons that have been learned. We've shared stories and heartaches and mistakes. So I know there's plenty more to talk about, but we're going to stop this right now. I hope this has been helpful, informative. I do encourage you to check out the show notes. We'll throw those few resources that have been mentioned there, those links to those so that you can find those. If this has been helpful to you, please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a rating or a review. Also, I'd encourage you, man, just to pass it along, share it with other church planting friends, your team, your sending church. Put it on your social media or whatever where other people can find it. We'd love to be a resource and a help to them as well, as they are in the city where God's called them to plant, or they're preparing to go to that city. Again, I'm Logan Wolf in Provo. I've been joined by my friend Chris Murray. He's down there in Santaquin, Utah. And this is Everything I Did Wrong as a Church Planter, a 1,000,000-part series.